Welcome to Shooting Straight. I'm David Clouse, your Navajo County Sheriff, and my partner.
I'm Brad Carlyon, your Navajo County Attorney.
This month we have a special guest. We're joined with Chief of Police from Snowflake Police Department, Larry Scarber. Larry, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Larry, our Chief, we're excited to have you here. We asked you to come on today. You have a countdown starting with your long, decorated career of 40 years, and I thought that was pretty remarkable and an amazing career you've had. And we wanted to kind of talk to you about that and the accomplishments you've had and kind of the changes you've seen in law enforcement in the span of 40 years.
Well, certainly, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I got here when I was on Shooting Straight when I was first hired as the Chief of Police at Snowflake Taylor with Mr. Carlyon and Sheriff Clark, and so now we're going to kind of close that chapter, and here I am again.
Yeah. So, how long you been the chief now in Snowflake?
It'll be just short of 4 years by the time I leave, and I chose my retirement date to end with the fiscal year so that the incoming chief, my Lieutenant Bobby Martin, will have a new budget to work with.
Good.
Is there any money in the budget, though?
Well, we hope there will be.
What I wanted, or what's kind of fascinating to me, you grew up here in Navajo County, correct?
I went to high school here. I moved here from Southwest Colorado when I was a sophomore in high school, moved to Snowflake and finished school there, and Snowflake has always felt like home.
What part of Colorado did you come from?
Near Durango, Ignacio.
Okay.
My dad worked for the BIA. We were on the Southern Ute Reservation there.
Okay.
So you started your career, I know you had a little time prior to Arizona in law enforcement.
That's correct.
But you started your career in Navajo County, and
That's
now
true.
you're ending your career in Navajo County.
Very true. My first assignment with DPS was in 1987 when I finished the academy down in Tucson and went to Kayenta and worked up there for just over 3 years and fell in love with the Navajo Nation.
Yeah, so you were assigned to the Kayenta district, or?
It was the Holbrook district and the Kayenta squad, so we covered the Four Corners area and almost to Tuba City down to many farms in Chinle.
That's a big patrol area. I think it's still one of the largest patrol areas for DPS, isn't it?
It is.
That part of the state.
Yes.
Yeah. And then tell us a little bit about your career in DPS. I know you had over 20 years with them. And
28. I retired with 28 years. I started out in Kayenta, went to Gila Bend. While I was in Gila Bend, I was an RTO at the academy down in Tucson again. From there, I promoted to Coolidge as a sergeant, worked the Coolidge-Florence area for several years, then promoted again to lieutenant in Globe and was the Globe district commander for 8 years and finished off as a major in Tucson. I was the Southern Highway Patrol Bureau commander in Tucson.
So somehow you managed to stay away from Phoenix
I
your whole
did.
career.
yeah, that's
impressive.
It was intentional. I don't like big crowds. Tucson was big enough, way big, but I had a wonderful career. I had a lot of opportunities with DPS, more than one person deserved. And one of those was tribal liaison. I was appointed by Director Garrett, Dennis Garrett, to be the first tribal liaison with DPS.
So it was all the tribes in the state?
It was.
With 30 some odd?
22.
22,
Yep.
okay.
I was the district commander at the time in Globe and had 5 tribes within my district. And I thought, gee, what are we doing or not doing with the tribes? And it was more not doing than doing. So I petitioned Director Garrett to allow me to be the tribal liaison. And the subsequent directors renewed that authorization, and I had 15 years of great experiences working as tribal liaison. It was in addition to my other duties. Nothing else got let up, but I did have wonderful associations with the tribes.
So what did you do as a tribal liaison with DPS? What would you try to help them with or understand or whatever it was?
Well, one of the big things was because tribal nations are sovereign nations, DPS had no authority unless over tribal members, over Native Americans on Indian country, unless the tribe granted that. So one of my roles was to go and work on intergovernmental agreements to share authority so that we could provide assistance as needed. So I did that, attended a lot of meetings. During that time, I also became a member of and then ultimately the secretary of the International Association of Chiefs of Police Indian Country Law Enforcement Section. And I did that until March of this year. So just finished my role there, and they appointed a new secretary for that. But it was, again, in that I was not only working with tribes from Arizona, but with tribes from throughout the United States. So very good experience.
Yeah.
And you worked a lot on the cross commissions that are currently
Yes.
in place with DPS, and I know it's things that we've worked on too. It's at the sheriff's office,
Certainly.
and they kind of mirror the program that you started there.
Yes, in fact, I got to attend the first cross-commission class with the Navajo Nation once we got our intergovernmental agreement. I was, by that time, the bureau commander in southern Arizona, so I didn't really have a practical use to be commissioned by the Navajo Nation, but I wanted to attend the training and see what our officers were getting. And after the 2.5-day training, I thought, boy, I wish I'd had that 30 or 25 years ago.
When you
Yeah.
started up in Kayenta.
Yes.
It would have been perfect.
Yes.
Is that kind of how you got your start with that tribal liaison position, was because you're positioned on the reservation?
I think so. That and the fact that I grew up in Indian country because of my dad's job. I was very comfortable living, working, going to school with Native Americans, and so it was just a very natural fit for me.
Yeah. So earlier this month, you had an opportunity to speak at a recent graduation. The sheriff's office graduated 5. I think there was 9 total that graduated from a local academy here in Navajo County. And you mentioned some things that were, I think some of the young recruits probably didn't think that would ever happen in law enforcement,
Sure.
where you would take on a position prior to the academy and,
Yes.
and different things like that. Tell us a little bit about your speech there at that.
Well, some of the changes that I've seen, and one of the biggest was the fact that when I was hired, and this was in Utah as a police officer, at that time you didn't have to complete an academy before you could be a police officer. You had a year to complete the academy. And a lot of the smaller agencies took advantage of that. My agency was small, and so I went through field training, then served for 10 months as an officer, a solo officer out on the road before I attended the Utah Police Academy. So we don't do that anymore.
So did you learn in the academy, or did you already know everything they taught you in the academy?
Yeah, how did that go in there?
The academy was much easier for me, I think. But boy, the first few steps as a solo officer were kind of challenging. I made an arrest one time. I knew the person had done something wrong, but my supervisor said, "What did you arrest him for?" And I said, "Well, he broke the law." "Well, what law was that?" I said, "Well, he did, didn't he?" But we had to look it up. So it was kind of a rough way to start a career. But again, that was fairly common back in those days, and we do it much better now, and a lot less liability to have trained officers out there. So I like the way we do it now. Another of the changes, when I first got hired, most of the agencies were carrying revolvers. So we had 6 in the cylinder and another 12 on our belt. Well, now our high-capacity magazines on our semi-automatic pistols generally have almost that many rounds just in one magazine. So that's a change. Our shoots started from the 50-yard line, so a lot of places don't do that.
No.
And might not be able to qualify
Yeah,
if they
not
did.
even close now.
Right, right. Some of the other changes, when I was a relatively new patrol officer, is when horizontal gaze nystagmus came into vogue as far as training for DUI enforcement and how to identify an impaired driver. And when I first heard about it, I thought, no, that's just voodoo magic there. Now it's something that we take for granted as a means of helping to confirm if somebody is impaired under alcohol. So that DNA had never made it to the forefront. We were still, the best we could do is come up with blood typing to narrow down our suspect list if there were body fluids found at a location.
And so your span of who it could be with a blood type is
much
much-
greater.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty wide open. So DNA was, again, just something that we hadn't even considered, and there have been some amazing changes in the technology. When I first got hired, I was issued a call box key. We did have portable radios, but we still had call boxes in the city of Provo.
So what is a call box?
A call box is if you didn't have a radio or it didn't work, you had a key, and about every block or so you could open that thing up, and it was a direct line to dispatch, and you could
So you
contact.
had no communication in your vehicle.
We did. We did
Okay.
have car radios, but when we were out on foot patrol, we were still issued the call box key just in case. But we did have portable radios, but they were like bricks. They were big and didn't work real well, but we were happy
Battery
to have
life,
them.
I'm sure, was not.
Right. Kind of short.
Did you have computers 40 years
No,
ago. So
no.
you're handwriting all your reports.
Everything was handwritten. When I mentioned at the graduation that in about 1988, I was one of 3 highway patrolmen that was selected for a pilot program to try and use a laptop computer. These were Radio Shack laptops. They were more like a word processor, but they had 20 megabytes of memory on them. And I remember thinking at the time, how could a person in a lifetime ever fill 20 megabytes of memory? And now we look at, I've got more than that on my phone. So
Yeah.
the times have very much changed.
How about documenting a scene with photography? I know that's really big today. Is we do a lot of photos and videos and audio recording interviews, and none of that was going on.
Right.
I'm sure.
Photos. We had cameras, but they were the kind that you looked down on to take the pictures. They took great pictures. We had a DPS photo lab that did wonders with whatever we took, whatever negatives we took to them. But unlike the digital photos today, we didn't know what our result was going to be until we got the film back.
Yeah, one of the things I find interesting is diagrams for traffic collisions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you spent 28 years, and that was your realm of
Right.
expertise. I'm sure that served its purpose then, having the diagram, because that's about all you had to go off of.
Sure.
And now today we have so many photos and videos,
Right.
and we reenact the scene with computers and all sorts of different imaging technology. I'm sure, but that's one of the things we're still using today that sometimes I wonder if.
It's gotten much better, and I think it's important because the juries, and I think you'd probably agree, Mr. Carlyon, they expect to see something that gets their attention and holds their attention. Having
MTV generation.
Yes,
They want
yes.
lots of visuals.
Yeah.
having 2 pieces of paper that are taped together so that you can show a 400-foot crash and the tire marks just really doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah, but it's something we're still doing
Sure.
today, which I always found kind of interesting that you'd see it had its purpose then and still has its purpose today, but I'm sure then it was a necessity. You
Right.
had to have it. But what are some other things that you've seen that have changed over the years in your career?
Well, one of the things, and I'll jump from my DPS career to the Snowflake Police Department, and that was a very pleasant surprise. I had worked as a highway patrol commander. I was working around a lot of various sized agencies, and I didn't know exactly what to expect. I'd never been a chief of police, never planned to be a chief of police. It just sort of happened, and it was a good thing for me and for my family to happen. But I didn't know quite what to expect, and I came up and found here was an agency that had jumped into body-worn cameras long before it was considered the thing to do. We used a company called Lexipol for our police policies, something that, again, was just very forward-looking. So I stepped into a very good situation with outstanding staff. I've always, for the past couple of decades, both in DPS and now here in Snowflake Police Department, I've been surrounded by staff that makes me look a whole lot better than I really am. So that's been very fortunate. We'll knock on wood for that one.
Yeah, there's always been a lot of changes or advancement in law enforcement. I think technology is at the lead of that in
Yes.
the private sector and also in the public sector in law enforcement. The things that used to probably take you an entire shift to accomplish or communicate with, now we're doing it electronically and getting it.
Certainly, and to be able to have the computer-aided dispatch system so that officers actually know the history of a location before they arrive there and the potential for danger. Those are some great changes, and it's just going to happen much faster and faster. It's a good thing that I'm getting out because I'm slowing down in my ability to learn, so I think it's the timing is perfect for that.
Over the course of your 40 years, there's got to be some very memorable events that happened during your law enforcement career. What were some of them that occurred that you look back on either with sadness or joy or the whole different emotional range?
Well, I was here for the Rodeo Chetasky fire. And at the time I was working as the district commander in Globe. I came up, I got notified at about 9 o'clock one evening that I needed to be in Show Low at 6 a.m. the next morning with 2 sergeants and 9 officers. So I had to gather my flock and have them ready to be in Show Low at 6 in the morning. and was up here for about 6 days straight, then went home for a few days to clean clothes, and then came back up and worked on the Heber side of the incident. That was memorable, and the fact that seeing so many resources working and coordinating together so well. That's when I first became more closely associated with incident command, and to see how that can work so well. So that was memorable. I shot my car one time. We probably don't need to go into that. I was involved in a pursuit and jumped out of my car and was staring down the barrel of a what seemed to be a cannon. It was a .45 revolver by a mentally distraught person. And I thought I shot and dropped, but apparently I dropped and shot because it bounced right off the trunk of my car and went over the suspect's car. But eventually it had a happy ending, and no one was harmed, so that was a good thing. I've had a lot of my experience over the last 21 years has been administrative, and I've had an opportunity to develop people, and that's been one of the things that I'm happiest about. I look at some of the people that were sergeants that worked with me when I was a bureau commander down in Tucson, who are now, well, one of them is a lieutenant colonel. He became my boss just before I was retired from DPS. Others who are majors and captains now, and so I'm very pleased with that. I was asked about that when I interviewed for the job with the Snowflake Police Department, and they asked, what would you do to develop your staff? And so I've tried to do that to the best of my ability, and that's why I'm very comfortable with my successor, Bobby Martin. Bobby was quite well prepared and very ambitious, very smart, very hardworking before I ever got here, and I think we just added to that. He's been through certified public manager training. I was able to get him into the FBI National Academy, and he is our accreditation manager for the department moving forward towards accreditation with the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police, which we're very proud of, because that will mean that we have been judged against best practices, and I think that will help our credibility with our community as well as the service that we provide.
So what were some of the ways that you helped develop these new law enforcement leaders, since we have the new sheriff?
Well, when I had administrative sergeants working for me down in Tucson, it's got to be one of the most boring jobs in DPS, because here are people who are young, they're ambitious, they're hardworking, and I got to pick the cream of the crop for those. And then I was putting them behind a desk and making them pretty much be a gopher for me for up to 2.5, 3 years. And so I figured I had to sweeten the pot somehow. So through training and education, the FBI provides the LEDA training, which is very valuable training for a supervisor. There are three segments of that before they are truly certified in that. The FBI National Academy is a great opportunity. It takes a while. Once you have an interest, it takes a while to be able to get someone there. It took almost 2.5 years for me to lobby and get Bobby Martin to attend. So that's an excellent training. Any type of education, formal education, is outstanding. The Certified Public Management program through Arizona State University is, I think, an excellent opportunity for development. And just mingling with other officers. I've made it a practice to attend the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference every year, and it's in a different location each year. And I found that if I foot the bill for the lodging, which was the most expensive portion of that, I would drag one of my sergeants along with me, and they would pay their own airfare. So we made it very inexpensive for the town, or the towns, to be able to do that. Literally all that was coming out of our police budget was the registration for the conference. And it opened their eyes. My first, Sergeant Ortiz, attended the first conference with me in Chicago right after I was hired by the police department. And he came back and he was like a sponge that had just soaked up a lot of information, and he said, I had no idea this existed. And in subsequent years, I've been able to take others. In fact, last year in Orlando, I was able to take 2, Lieutenant Martin and Sergeant DeWitt. So these are great opportunities to see that there's more out there than just our little communities, and it's a great chance to get new ideas. It was at the IACP conference that I learned about Narcan, and we were one of the early agencies in Navajo County to supply our officers with Narcan for the use in opioid overdoses. That's where I learned about the One Mind Pledge, which is mental health, improving officer response to mental health crises. And this was a pledge through the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It required us to work more closely with ChangePoint, our mental health services provider, to make sure that our policies and procedures were consistent with best practices, to get our entire staff trained in mental health first aid, and to get 20% of our staff trained in crisis intervention team training. And I'm very pleased to say that we just completed that pledge. We were the 7th agency in Arizona to make the pledge, and we were the 3rd agency to complete the pledge. And we did that just the middle of last month. So that was one of the things that I wanted to finish before I left the department. But you get new ideas at conferences like that, and then you come back and you try and adapt and implement them in your own agency.
So you talked about a lot of great things that a lot of forward-thinking agencies are working on today. What do you think is in it for the next generation? Like my generation of officers and leaders in law enforcement that will be faced with or will be challenged and need to adapt to work on?
Well, one of the challenges that we face right now, and that's staffing, keeping people interested and finding people who are qualified to serve in this profession. When I applied with DPS, they did 3 tests in one day, one in Flagstaff, one in Phoenix, and one in Tucson, with nearly 1,000 people testing for about 65 positions. And we don't see that kind of a response anymore to testing. So when we put an advertisement out, the pool is much smaller. And we find that many people have made choices in their lives that mean that they can't qualify with the background that Arizona Post requires. So finding a way to reach out to attract and then to retain qualified people, I think is going to be one of the biggest challenges that you face. We're facing it now, and I think it's only going to get worse. As law enforcement gets criticized in a lot of national media, I think it becomes less inviting for a lot of people. That's where we're fortunate, because living in this area, we have so much public support, and it may not always seem that way, but I've found there's hardly a week goes by that I don't get some feedback from the public that we're doing a good job and that they appreciate us, that they're behind us, they stand with us. So I think we're fortunate in that sense, and maybe our pool hopefully will be a little better because of that, but it's still very hard to keep staffed.
It is, and that's kind of one of the things we were talking about the academy, how it's not the right thing. I don't agree with it, but sometimes it's like, it'd be so easy to get somebody on the road, like how you were introduced into law enforcement, because right now it's such a long time through background or hiring, background training, field training, then they're released on as a solo officer or deputy. It could be 10, 11 months from the time they fill out that application. And so when you see that, you're like, but that would be a step backwards.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And you wouldn't sleep well as the sheriff.
I wouldn't sleep well as the attorney for the county.
No, not at all. But maybe that was some of the challenges they had then, but as we have today.
Sure.
So. But, as one of the things I've done as a sheriff is traveled around the state and met with different sheriffs, like you were talking about, your association with chiefs of police. And, every time I say I'm from Snowflake or Navajo County, your name's always brought up with a lot, especially in southern Arizona. You had a remarkable career. You've influenced a lot of the policies in DPS and across the state, something you should be really proud of for the last 40 years. And every time I'm somewhere there, you must know Chief Scarber or Larry. I was like, I do, and you've done a lot of great things here in Navajo County and made a great difference in the last 40 years. So we thank you for your service and what you've done to help us, and always. I know you feel good and proud of what your replacement. Look forward to working with him, and you left it in good hands there with Bobby. And it's, I guess, time for a new torch of leaders to carry the torch now. So.
I agree. Somebody with better legs. Run a little faster.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for this week for Shooting Straight. Stay tuned for our Most Wanted.
The Navajo County Sheriff's Office is seeking Roman Quiroz and Victoriano Quiroz with the last known address of 8557 Jackrabbit Drive in Show Low. If you have any information of the whereabouts of these brothers, please call the Navajo County Sheriff's Office at 928-524-4050 or anonymously through WeTip at 1-800-78-CRIME or WeTip.com.